This video is brought to you by MoviePalette.com and enter ROOM15 for 15% off of your palette. Hey horror fans, welcome back to Room 237, back with another review as I continue my run through of films based on real life serial killers. And this was a film I was kind of putting off because I was actually waiting for a book that I ordered to come in, a book that's on this serial killer. And I wanted to read through that real quick before I watch this. Hasn't come in yet. I'm kind of getting down towards the end of the films that I have, so I figured why not check this one out. But I also didn't realize just how fictional this film is. I mean, I don't think there's really one factual thing that this movie gets right. There are certain things or nods to facts, but even then it's done either slightly altered or different. There's really nothing really accurate about this film. But it comes from an era of, the mid to late 2000s when all of these were coming out. It's actually filmed by Lionsgate, and unfortunately, this is one of the worst ones of the lot that I've done so far. Not counting the Uwe Lamel films. You can't really get as bad as that. And it's a real shame because the killer that this is about, it's another major, a notorious name. And again, I don't know if I can say the term favorite for lack of a better term. He's another top 5 favorite. I might say he's my third favorite. He's one of the most fascinating ones to read about. I mean, there's so much about this guy that is so interesting. And this movie really butchers it. There are some really great documentaries of him, though. And that is Ed Kemper. And the film is 2008's Kemper, or Kemper the Co-EdKiller. Now, yes, this is going with the same sort of trend of the early 2000s film where it's just sort of a dark, creepy, up-close picture of their face. Like Ted Bundy, Dahmer, Gacy. There's a number of films like that. But the way the killer looks and with his glasses, this almost looks like a dark Roy Orbison film. And I will say the actor that plays him, Robert Sisko, he's not a good Ed Kemper. His performance is fine if you take Ed Kemper out of the equation, but he's not Ed. And he looks more like Roy Orbison. If he styled his hair differently, he could probably play Roy Orbison. And that's another, I don't know when this movie takes place, which I'll get to, because his age and just the things that are around, like the cars, cell phones, laptops, I don't know if they just don't know how to if they didn't know how to make a film look like the 1970s. But it was directed by Rick Bitzelberger. I hope that's a pseudonym. I can't click on his name, so I don't know what else he's done. Written by Jack Perez. Stars Christopher Stapleton and Robert Sisko. Hank Beaumont Jr. did the cinematography. Jeff Levin did the music, even though I don't remember a note of any of the music in this. I mean, it's short. It's only 88 minutes, but it's short, but you're kind of just wondering, when is this going to end? Because more than half of the film is completely fictional. I mean, after Ed's final victim, where he killed his last two on April 20th of 73, after he did that, not long after, he turned himself in, and he was completely cooperative. This movie shows, and his next to last victim was his mother. After he kills his mother in this, which is kind of in the beginning, he goes on the run. He's quickly discovered and is this cat and mouse sort of detective procedural, which I don't know why they went that route. Maybe it's to sort of showcase his intelligence, because Ed Kemper is known to be one of the smartest or most intellectual serial killers ever. He had a near genius IQ of 141 to 145, depending on what you read. And maybe this was just trying to show how smart he was. Unfortunately for him, I do think he is smarter than Ted Bundy, but I think Bundy has the legacy and the reputation of being the smart one, but I think he actually had the intellect. So maybe the whole cat and mouse approach was to show his intelligence. I don't know. This is another case where all names are changed. Um, I don't even know if they. Yeah, they even changed his mother's name. Her name is Clarnell, but in the film she's Alma, which I'm not sure why. Uh, Also, it shows another serial killer. In the film, it's Herbert McCormick, but it's based on real life serial killer Herbert Mullen. Which, yes, the two were killing around the same time, between 72 and 73. Uh, they were caught around the same time. I think Herbert Mullen was caught around February. Kemper was end of April, beginning of May of 73. They did serve time together. There's actually some funny stories and interviews about Kemper kind of having to babysit him, essentially. Which I'll probably talk about that later. But yeah, in the film, Herbert McCormick is shot and killed. So they fictionalize a lot of shit in this. And they don't really show his MO. I mean, obviously skulls are found in his backyard. There's 3 in the film. In real life, 1 skull was found in his backyard. His 4th victim, Cindy Shaw, or 6th victim overall, her head was found in the backyard looking up at his mother's window. Because according to Ed, she always wanted people to look up to her. But it doesn't show him really killing. Well, it shows him killing some of his victims. It's mostly a montage of him like dumping the bodies or just seeing them there. None of them are dismembered, and that was a big part of his MO. I'm not saying they should have had blood and gore and make it a slasher film. No, that would be for surface level true crime people. But to change it that much, I mean, maybe they didn't want to be that salacious. I have no idea. But this is just not a good movie. It's very low budget. There are times where the lead detective in this, named Tom Harris, subtle. I don't know if it's, maybe they did that as a nod because parts of Kemper was he partly inspired a Buffalo Bill, Silence of the Lambs by Thomas Harris. Really just the aspect that Buffalo Bill also killed his grandparents when he was young, as Kemper did. So maybe that's just a nod back to Tom Harris. I don't know. But there are times like when Harris is talking to his wife, it looks like a daytime soap opera show. Like just the cinematography, the quality of it. It definitely feels like a Lionsgate film. It has that horror movie editing, like where something will happen with like a music sting or a scream, and it'll like cut to the next scene, but with like an echo, the kind of fast editing. But then like when there's like the horror movie scenes, like when this one hitchhiker's being tortured, the colors are so saturated, it almost looks like a Saw film, a lesser Saw film. None of the performances are good. I mean, the acting is pretty bad. I did say that Robert Sisko was fine. He would have been fine in a better movie that's not Ed Kemper. And at no point do they even mention or nod his stature. Because Ed Kemper is known for being 6'9" and 280 pounds. A large human being. Robert Sisko is a normal sized guy. But at no point do they even... there's one line in the beginning saying, "Oh, I see some heavy boot prints near the body," which at first I was like, "Oh, okay," implying that he's huge. Uh, can't wait to see what the actor actually looks like. But they never mentioned his size or anything. I do know that the show Mindhunter, which I did start, that guy is great as Kemper, looks and sounds just like him. I don't know if they used forced perspective to make him look larger than he is, but he's great as Ed. But yeah, this movie's pretty bad across the board. I mean, even some of the stuff it gets factually correct, it's altered in some way. So if you want if you want to learn about Ed Kemper, you're not going to get anything from this. I mean, even lesser serial killer movies like, say the 2003 Gacy or the Jeremy Renner Dahmer, or lesser films like that. Hell, even I was going to say the Kate Hodder BTK film, but I won't say that. Even some of the lesser ones, there's still something to gain from it, some sort of insight as to what these killers were like during their time. You're not going to get anything from Kemper or about Kemper from this. Sure, when he talks about his mother and just how awful she was to him, sure, or the fact he kills her with a claw hammer, sure, but even then, the events surrounding it, like she was killed in her bed, not watching TV. So even things that are correct, they're just slightly twisted. And I really didn't like the whole cat and mouse pursuit approach, especially since it's so fictionalized. And even if the movie was good, I would have had a problem with that. Like, I don't mind having to change, say, victims' names, or having to make composite events, for the sake of time and sort of making the story work. But to completely almost rewrite history, like a guy who turned himself in versus a guy playing this cat and mouse game with the police, that I had a problem with. Now, as I said, Ed Kemper, if I had to pick a top 5 favorite serial killers, and by that I mean ones I find the most fascinating, the ones I like to read and watch the most about, Kemper would be number 3. Of course, as I said, numerous documentaries, which he's in all these. I have about a dozen sort of Time, Life, and Globe magazines on serial killers. Of course, the 24 encyclopedic books on killers, which he's here on the cover. But works on Ed specifically, I only have 2 books. I do have Conversations with a Killer, which, since this book exists, I'm really hoping that the next or one of the next seasons of the Netflix Conversations with the Killer is on Ed Kemper. This is a great read. And then I thought this was going to be a bigger than it is, but a book by Jack Rosewood. I actually have a couple like this. I have a David Berkowitz one too, where it's almost just like it's more like a pamphlet, really. The book I was waiting on is, there's a series called Hourly History, which is on everything, of everything. There's one on the Titanic, one about presidents, world leaders, serial killers, pretty much everything. Big major events. Breaks it down like day by day, hour by hour. That's the book I was waiting on to come in, and I'm very excited to read that. So this is all I really have on just Kemper himself. He is one of the killers I did send a letter to. He used to respond pretty well up until about 5 years ago. I figured I'd try it anyway. He did have a stroke recently, and I heard he's kind of reclusive now, which is, I say it's unfortunate, but still. So yeah, this is not a good film at all, which really sucks because Kemper is so fascinating. I mean, the relationship with his mother, killing his grandparents at 15, them thinking he's schizophrenic, but takes an IQ test, scores 136. They think something's messed up, takes it again, scores over 140. So into psychology that he even comes up with psychological tests for inmates that the facility was using, which was at Atascadero in California. Then he gets out, starts killing co-eds, you know, picking them up, dismembering them, having sex with their bodies and their heads, all the way up to a boiling point with his mother where he does the same thing to her, then he turns himself in. But also who he is as a person. I mean, highly, highly intelligent. There is a story with, I think it was, I can't remember exactly which victim. I think it was one of the first three, you know, post-release, where he went to go put handcuffs on her, intending to sexually assault and murder her, but his hand accidentally brushed up against one of her breasts, and he apologized. He was like, "Oh, I'm sorry." Like, there's just, he's so compelling to read and watch things on. I think Peacock has the series Mind of a Monster. There's one called the Co-EdKiller. That's like 2 hours, 2.5 hours. That's very interesting. He's done a bunch of interviews that you can find online. I've watched all the interviews. There was a compilation called Kemper on Kemper that was very good. Yet, of course, partially inspired Buffalo Bill. There was a Dean Koontz book. I think it was called Agony, but I could be wrong. I think Kemper partially inspired. There is a line in American Psycho, which is not a horror movie. People keep saying that I should review the horror movie American Psycho. It's not a horror movie, but when he quotes, when I see a pretty girl walking down the road, there's two things I think of. One is, I think about wanting to take her on a nice date, get to know her, and such. And the second thing I think about is what her head would look like on a stick. Now, that is a correct quote, but in American Psycho, they attribute it to Ed Gein, not Ed Kemper. It is an Ed Kemper quote. Of course, Mindhunter. And so, I'm pretty sure this is the only film about Kemper, which is unfortunate because the only film about him is what, aside from the Uwe Lamel films, I mean, I would put this in the realm of almost like the Andrew Jones films, I would say. Like BTK with Kate Hodder, or Boston Strangler, or Killer Next Door, which is mostly fictional, but there's barely just enough to make it relevant to the real person. I would say this is in the same, I when I did the BTK review, I said Uwe Lamel is down here, and then just above it is those Andrew Jones films. I would put that there. And this is one I had never seen before, so I didn't know it was going to be this fictionalized. So if you're interested in Ed Kemper and you like serial killer films, just know that this is extremely highly fictionalized. Not to the point of like a Will Barrett film, like Ted Bundy, American Boogeyman, or something like that. But it's more than 60-40, I'd say, fictionalized. And there's really not much to gain of educationally about Kemper. There's really not anything that you're going to walk away with that you probably didn't know before. So yeah, definitely one of the worst I've seen, but still not quite an Uwe Lamel film. So now we'll get into the film itself. So before I get into the actual film itself, as I always like to do, just sort of a brief summary or brief cliff notes of the killer himself. Edmund Emil Kemper III, aka the Co-EdKiller, was born December 18th of 1948, and after serving 6 years for murdering his grandparents at the age of 15 in August of 1964, he would go on an 11-month killing spree between May 7th of 72 and April 20th of 73, killing 6 co-eds, followed by his own mother, Clarnell, and her friend, Sally Hallett. All of his victims after his grandparents, he would dismember, decapitate, have sex with their corpses and their severed heads, and some of them he would even keep their heads for several days. And these activities were not limited to his mother. He then turned himself in. He is known for his towering 6'9" height, along with his near genius IQ of 141 to 145, a source is pending. He was at first deemed schizophrenic at 15, but was later re-diagnosed as disturbed passive-aggressive type. He was a model prisoner and took to psychology, even administering tests and counseling to other inmates. This is where he learned, quote, leave no witnesses. He was released in 1969 at the age of 21 and began his spree, picking up hitchhikers around the Santa Cruz campus area. He always had a hateful relationship with his mother, Clarnell. He tortured animals as a child, and in 1973 he moved back in with her, which is the place in which he would use to bring his victims back, and where he would dismember them and do all his activities there, including even burying one skull in her backyard. After he killed his mother, he would say there was no point to killing. The feeling was gone, on top of also just feeling like he's on the verge of collapse. He remained a model prisoner at California Medical Center in Vacaville. So now we can actually get into the film itself. And obviously there's a ton more on Kemper, way more in-depth than what I just did. Again, that's just sort of a brief summary. So it opens up with a detective named Tom Harris, as I said. He's probably based on Don Smythe or Terry Medina, or both, which, oh no, that's someone else. But it does show his partner or kind of replacement, so maybe one's based on one, one's the other. I have no idea. It shows him going to 2 different crime scenes, one of which there's a girl's head in an oven, and another one there's a girl dumped at a park. And he thinks it has to be 2 different people based on, the profile, the MO. So he enlists his friend, Ed. He gives Ed the file, he looks at it, he gives his opinion, which, this is slightly true. Ed did try to be a cop, he wanted to be a cop, he had great respect for law enforcement, but his application was denied due to his height, which I always thought was kind of strange. Apparently they have a cutoff, and he was 6'9". But he would always go down to cafes and bars where all the cops would hang out, and he would just ask questions about cases, especially his, so he could just hear what they knew. But even that was kind of a joy for him, knowing that they're giving information to the guy that's actually doing it. But that was pretty much the extent of it. They called him Big Ed. They thought, they saw him as a friend. They even called him a friendly nuisance. But he was never in any position to be given case files with photographs to look at. Later on, it says that he was on the payroll. He never was. In real life, it really never extended past just being a familiar face or a friend at bars and cafes. But he helped solve these cases. Maybe that's another nod to Silence of the Lambs or Tom Harris. I'm not sure. But the one with the head in the oven, yes, he would decapitate his victims, but he never killed anyone, again, post-grandparents. He never killed any of them in their own home. He would either kill them in his car or a remote location or bring them back to his mother's house. Of course, they all have different names. I think this one goes by Peggy Marshall. He's hanging out with Tom Harris. Harris is staking out the crime scene at the park that we saw, and some guy shows up to take pictures. They go to approach him. Ed's helping, but the guy takes out a rifle. Tom Harris shoots him, and yeah, turns out that's Herbert McCormick, based on Herbert Mullen. Excuse me, which Herbert Mullen was not shot to death. In fact, he just died recently. Like I think it was either this past summer or the summer or last year. I want to say it was in August. I think it was actually this past August. Quick story, which you can find an interview of this. You know, Herbert Mullen, when he was in prison, he wanted music, but he couldn't have it, so he would just sing really loudly, to the point where the other prisoners were getting really agitated, to the point where both prisoners and guards were going up to Ed and being like, Ed, you got to do something about Herbert. Which Ed would kind of taunt him sometimes. He called him Herbie or Little Herbie, which he hated. And Kemper knew his psychology. He knew how to get what he needed from him. But he knew Mullen had a thing for peanuts. So he'd tell him to stop singing. If you stop singing, I'll give you some peanuts. So he would. He'd give him some peanuts. And so he started, kind of like a dog, treating him whenever he was good, he'd give him some peanuts. He also, his cell was in such a place where he could splash water on him. So Mullen started, standing in different areas, but Ed had a mirror so he could see where he was. So there's a really good interview where he talks about all that. I think they only put this McCormick character in there because the two were so closely associated. Because they were killing around the same time in the same area with similar victim profiles. And they would go on to serve in the same prison. So I'm guessing that's why. So yeah, the meeting with Ed shows his opinion. It never went on past just hanging out in bars and cafes. So then we just see him killing his mother, which I don't remember how the film depicted it. Oh, she has to get her cough medicine. A spoon. He got her cough medicine. She said, "Oh, I need a spoon. Go and get it. It don't take forever." So he gets up. She chides him again, but he grabs a hammer and he kills her. In real life, he came home late. He wanted to talk to her. She said, "I suppose you want to stay up and talk now." And he just said, No, I'm fine." So then he waited for her to fall asleep, hit her in the head with a hammer, then slit her throat with a penknife. The movie doesn't really go in depth other than him hitting her with a hammer. But it also showed him when he went to go get her cough medicine, he picked up a hitchhiker, which after he killed his mother, he went in to go get her for the trunk. He did kill someone right after his mother, but it was her friend Sally Hallett, and this was on April 20th of 73. And then we see this girl's dead body. She was not dismembered. She was dumped somewhere, I think kind of publicly, which he never did. I don't remember why, but the detective goes to Ed's house. I think to talk to him about the case, but he walks in, sees all the blood, his mother's blood, and then Ed calls him, and then that's when the cat and mouse game begins. Also, I started to think, when the hell does this movie take place? Because it shows him at a cafe, and Ed asks him for pictures, and he says, "Oh, I've got copies on my laptop." And it took me a second. I was like, "Wait, laptop? This is supposed to be 1972, 73, and he has a laptop?" And then every time they're talking on the phone, it's a cell phone. All the cars are modern. People look and dress modern or 2008. So why they made it present day, I have no idea. But that really kind of took me out of it. Um, so Ed's discovered when in reality he turned himself in. He was very cooperative. Uh, when Harris goes in the kitchen, it shows the sink with some sort of bloody human something coming out of the drain. He's talking to Ed, and Ed's like, "Oh yeah, those are her vocal cords. I tried to shove them down there, turn on the disposal, and it shot back up at me." That is true. Okay, that's one thing it got. After he killed his mother, after he did things to her head, he put her head up on the mantle. He stared at it for like an hour. He yelled at it. He threw darts at it. And then he cut out her larynx, tried putting it in the garbage disposal, but it was so tough that it just shot back out. And Kemper was later said, "It's very fitting, seeing how much she bitched at uh, in all the years that she yelled at me." So I always thought that was kind of darkly funny, just the way he said it. But so that's one thing it gets right. Harris is talking to someone else. It says Ed had been on the payroll for a while. Genius level intelligence, borderline autistic, gift for criminology. Now, yes, he did have near genius intelligence. He did have a knack for criminology. Again, he was like essentially a psychologist assistant, even coming up with his own tests when he was serving at a Atascadero. I never heard anything about him being borderline autistic, or even nowadays, if they were to retest him, if he would be considered. And he was never on the payroll. Yes, he wanted to be a cop, but he was denied for his size. So, and so then the rest of the movie, he's on the run. It's this cat and mouse game, and it makes up a lot. He picks up this hooker-looking girl. She's tied to a chair somewhere, which is this scene. He makes a video and sends it to the police, this sort of Joker hostage-esque video. Because Harris gets kicked off the case, so he makes this video saying, put Harris back on the case, or the killings will continue. So Harris is reinstated. There's even a phone call where we see she's still alive, and he goes to cut her toes off with a machete while still on the phone to show she's alive but tortured. I don't think torturing was ever really his thing, at least not that way. He always strangled or slit their throat. I think he always tried to make the death as quick as possible, but yes, he would rape them. But I don't think he systematic chop this off, chop that, really prolonged the agony. Of all the dismembering was post-mortem, but that's much later. Hooker. Oh, and yeah, he never sent anything to the police, notes or videos. The closest thing was after he killed his Clarnell's friend Sally Hallett. They found her head in a closet, and there was a note that was left. Pretty much saying the time and sorry, kind of sloppy. I don't remember exactly what it said, but so then they're in the backyard. They find 3 skulls, all 6 feet apart from each other. I think they say something about 666. All the skulls are looking up at his mother's bedroom window. In real life, it was just the skull of Cindy Shaw that was buried looking up at the window, because according to Kemper, she always wanted people to look up at her. I'm pretty sure it was just the one skull, and he would go on to say that after he buried the skull, he would go out and just talk to it the way you would a girlfriend. She was his fourth victim in the spree, sixth overall, and that was January 7th of 73. There's a flashback to when he killed his grandparents. It shows him like 9 or 10 years old shooting them with a rifle, but they're both in their beds, and then his mother rushes up to him after the sound of it. In real life, he got in an argument with his mother, whom he hated just as much as his mother. Her name was Maud. They get in an argument. He goes outside. She says, "You better not be shooting any more birds." Grabs his rifle, goes back in, shoots her. Some sources say that she had some stab wounds, but I don't think that was ever made official. Then when his grandfather came home from grocery shopping, he shot him in the driveway. And again, that was August 27th of 64. And then there is a line from young Ed, which, again, he was 15, but the movie makes him look like 9 or 10. We hear him say, "I just wanted to see what it felt like." He did say that's why he killed his grandmother. I want to know what it was like to kill grandma. But he shot his grandfather so he wouldn't have to go in and see his wife dead. Oh, and also the fact that his mother was there. He did call his mother after he killed them both to see what he should do, and she said, "Turn yourself in." So we did. He called him, and then when they pulled up, he was sitting there waiting. They're talking on the phone. He's trying to track Ed. They mentioned a shrine to his mother that she didn't really like. I might have missed something, but I think they're referring to when he was 10. He took his mother's cat, buried it, and then when it died, he dug it back up, decapitated it, put its head on a stick. And Clarnell did not appreciate that. I don't know if that's what they were referring to, but... so then the phone call where he cuts the girl's toes off. A montage of Ed taking Polaroids of all his victims. Again, none of which are dismembered or decapitated. But when we see Polaroids, we see like severed heads and limbs, so... not really sure about that disconnect, unless it's implying there was way more that he did that to. I never saw anything about him taking photos. I could be wrong, but I don't ever remember hearing or reading anything about him taking photos. But by this time, they find that he's in the abandoned hospital that he was born in. They save the girl. Then there's this one-on-one with him and Harris. And Kemper shares the stories of his mother, how awful she was. Says he was the product of rape. And, she said, my father's seed was poisoned. And, he poisoned me with you. You're my toxin. Which, that I've read and heard that something to that effect, his mother calling him a toxin or a poison. But never that he was the product of rape, spousal rape. She was awful to his father, too. His father was a suicide, he would do suicide missions in World War II. And later on he would say suicide missions overseas were nothing compared to living with her. And just talking about how she would just tell him this all the time and how it broke him down. Also, the actor looks like he's in his 40s. Kemper was 24, 25 at the time of his spree. So, yeah, I'm not sure about the casting choice. Or if they're trying to make it seem like he's been killing since 72, 73. and he's just, you know, lived on. But that would put him in his 60s, and his mother would have been like 80 something. So Christ. It does show him being beaten by Clarnell when he was really young for painting his nails. I don't ever remember reading that story specifically, but there was a line, something about going upstairs in his house, and he said it's when Harris is on the phone with Ed at first when he's in Ed's house, and he's about to go upstairs, and Ed said, "Don't go upstairs." Why? Because I'm not allowed up there. When he was a kid, he wasn't allowed to sleep in a bedroom. She made him sleep down in the basement. And in an interview, he said he took that as, his parents and his sisters are going up to heaven, and I have to go down to hell. One, because she hated him, and two, because she didn't trust him. She thought he was dangerous. And then we see him put a pistol to his chin, and then just as Harris goes to raise his pistol, we hear a bang, cut to black, made to seem like he committed suicide. No, a sniper stopped him before he could. And then there's just a conversation of those two in prison. And then it ends. Which, he did attempt suicide at least twice in between his indictment, or his arrest, and his trial. Obviously not by firearm. And that's the movie. Yeah. So, not a whole lot true. Really nothing that you could walk away with, be like, oh, I did not know that about Ed Kemper. Anything that it does show that it is factual, you can see in any book or any documentary, any podcast. Which the podcasts I listen to, I like Serial Killers from Parcast and True Crime All the Time. They both have great episodes on Kemper. Yeah, there's really nothing new or really in-depth beyond what you could read or see anywhere else. It's not filmed very well. It's not very engaging either. I mean, hell, even... Sure, the idea of a cat and mouse detective trying to catch a serial killer, that should make it interesting, even if you can suspend the fact it's not true. Just get into the idea of it. Should be entertaining. It's not. Even if you separate it and look at it by itself, it's not entertaining or really that interesting. The acting's pretty bad. It's hard to buy this guy as Kemper just because he looks so unlike him. Looks more like Roy Orbison. It does draw attention to his intelligence. I mean, not just because he's outsmarting the cops throughout most of the movie, but because of all these books he talks about and, psychology and everything. They do draw attention to his intelligence, which I will give him that. But yeah, lastly, not as bad as an Uwe Lamel film, but in the realm of like the Andrew Jones films, I might even say it's worse than some of those that I've seen. And that's really sad because, Ed Kemper to me is my number 3, most fascinating, most interesting. His story is so fascinating and interesting. It's so different. It's so unique to him that you don't have to make anything up. You really don't. You can just follow the Ed Kemper story, and it will be incredibly engaging and very intriguing. So it sucks that the only movie really based on him is as bad as it is. So that's unfortunate. I am very excited for that Hourly History book to come in. Can't wait to check that out. I would highly recommend going to... you can find it on YouTube. Mind of a Killer, the Co-EdKiller. Very good documentary. Just check that out. Also, all of his interviews. The compilation is called Kemper on Kemper. But there's compilations that you can find on YouTube, and they're all good. They're all interesting. So yeah, that's my review for the not good only Ed Kemper film, Kemper. I have a few more to get to. We're kind of narrowing down on the end of my collection. Christmas is coming, so I'm not going to be picking any more up soon, but maybe I'll do another run through after a few months or whatever. So stay tuned for the last few I have, and thank you for watching.